Thank you for tuning in to the Practical Preservation Podcast. Please take a moment to visit our website, practicalpreservationservices.com, for additional information and tips to help you restore your historical home. If you've not done so, please subscribe to us on iTunes, Stitcher, or SoundCloud, and also like us on Facebook. Welcome to the Practical Preservation Podcast, hosted by Danielle and Jonathan Kepperling. Kepperling Preservation Services is a family-owned business based in Lancaster, Pennsylvania, dedicated to the preservation of our built architectural history for today's use as well as future generations. Our weekly podcast provides you with expert advice specific to the unique needs of renovating a historic home, educating by sharing our From the Trenches preservation knowledge and our guests' expertise, balancing modern needs while maintaining the historical significance, character, and beauty of your period home.
Today on the Practical Preservation Podcast, we have Julie Fitzpatrick and Mary Tate from the PA Downtown Center with us. Thank you for joining us, ladies.
Thanks for having us.
Okay. So tell me a little bit about your background, and you could choose who goes first.
Go ahead, Mary.
Oh, I'm making eye signals at you. Okay, my name is Mary Tate. Like Danielle said, I'm the Field Services Coordinator with the Pennsylvania Downtown Center. And my role there is to assist primarily with the designated Main Street and Elm Street communities within the Commonwealth of Pennsylvania. And that is a program through the Department of Community and Economic Development, in which we are the educational and technical service provider. We also do third-party contracts, so I have a couple of those contracts that I work with as well, geared towards the preservation efforts of those communities. But my background is in historic preservation. My education comes from historic preservation, both my undergraduate and master's degrees. And I've had the opportunity to work across sectors, so both private sector, municipal, and nonprofit. So I think the combination of all of that has really prepared me well to do the work that the Pennsylvania Downtown Center does. Julie?
So I've been with the Pennsylvania Downtown Center now for a little over 15 years. I actually started as an intern when I was finishing my master's degree, and have worked through different positions, and in July of 2019 then became the executive director. So I've really, most of the work that I've been doing at the Pennsylvania Downtown Center is geared towards what Mary referenced of our third-party contracts. And what that means is it's really more planning and technical assistance. So working communities through a community visioning process, helping them develop and build consensus in the community, and also very specific and implementable strategies and plans for that downtown or neighborhood or kind of general community in some cases. And my experience coming into the Pennsylvania Downtown Center, I've actually, my work experience is working in a locally owned and managing a locally owned pharmacy. So it's very different in that sense, and yet it really laid the foundation for me in building community and building relationships and an ethic of service that I think, we really strive to bring to the work we do throughout the Commonwealth. Educationally, I have a background in art history, anthropology, landscape architecture, and then a master's in community and regional planning. And I'd like to give a shout out to Temple University, because I think with Mary, she's got the western part of the state, and I've got the eastern part of the state in that sense. But, I think Temple was a great place to get academic and very practical experience. And with the master's program in planning, I would highly recommend it to anyone who has any interest, because it is so diverse and multidisciplinary. And they brought a lot of practitioners into the academic realm that I think really positioned us graduates very well for what is faced, or what we face on a regular basis. But I think from the Pennsylvania Downtown Center perspective, we really do try to stay on top of some of the current issues and needs that communities have. The Main Street methodology has been around now for decades, actually, since 1980, and yet it's still relevant. And I think, that is a testament to the work that the National Main Street Center is doing. The National Main Street Center is a subsidiary of the National Trust for Historic Preservation, so really rooted and grounded in building off of what makes our communities unique and authentic, and looking at ways that we can really maintain and preserve those characteristics, while at the same time also looking at ways that we need to stay relevant. And I think now more than ever, whether it's the COVID crisis or certainly the civil unrest that we're dealing with in all of our communities, it's just, for me, another opportunity for Main Street, for downtowns, our communities, our neighborhoods, to really demonstrate their position and their relevancy and their importance in our lives. Really, it's not just about a business district. It's not just about where commerce occurs, but these are places. Ideally, we're all working to create places where people are choosing to work. They're choosing to set up their businesses, to lead their lives, to grow their families. And I think if we could wrap up everything in a simple phrase or two, it's really about creating places where people are choosing.
And I think that was it would definitely, I think, is a trend that's on the upswing. Yeah, and you probably feel that way also, but there was a trend for a long time of people leaving the cities to go out to the suburbs. And I live in Lancaster City, and it's amazing to me even the perceptions that continue even now for people that don't come into the city. And Lancaster City is not big. I mean, it's not a big city by any means, but I help a friend. She's an acupuncturist, and I was in her office doing paperwork earlier this week, and somebody came, and her office is also in town, but on the other side of town, but still it's in a very quiet, nice neighborhood. And the woman came in and said, "How much rioting have you seen?" And I'm like, "You just drove through town to get here. Did you see any rioting?" But it's the perception.
Yep.
Yeah. So I think
I'm really proud too because I live outside of Lancaster as well, and I don't live in the city, but I live in a small town, the West, and I have to say I'm so proud of our local leaders.
I agree.
Pennsylvania. I mean, our leaders in Harrisburg, our leaders in Lancaster, because I think we're all really they are leading the way with civil discourse, and ways that we can talk about it. And it's interesting too. I mean, the places where people have congregated, are our commons and our plazas and our greens, and it's the place where we have historically gone to have our voices be heard, and it's where we still go. We're not going to the mall,
Right.
We're not going to the industrial park to have our protests. We're going to our downtowns.
Yeah, and that's true. I hadn't thought of that.
Yeah. I mean, I actually last night I wrote our statement that we're going to be releasing in light of the current social situation, and I think that is another reason, I mean, why we remain relevant, because whether we're going through a time where we have to, socially or physically distance, there is still an incredible desire to want to be there. We are social creatures, and there's no better place to come together than in a downtown.
And I think that's all of our network, the managers within the state of the Main Street programs and the Elm Street programs. We're so fortunate that they all want to be proactive. And we've seen that over the course of the last couple months for sure. And especially we had some really good conversations yesterday. We do listening sessions with our managers over the last couple months to see what they're experiencing and what they need help with. And so we've tried to be really responsive to all of that. And a piece that came out of that was Julie formed a recovery and resiliency task force. So we're trying to address certain key areas For example, we looked at farmers markets, the local places that we gather, delivery services, vacant properties. And now I think we're seeing kind of, due to the last 2 weeks, we're kind of a shift in some of the discussions and maybe some areas that we need to adapt to make sure that downtowns are equipped with what they need, and how to handle conversations and address things that may be uncomfortable for people, but have to be addressed at this point in time.
Yeah. I agree. I agree with that. And I think I was just thinking that as our conversation was kind of, shifting a little bit, which I think is a good conversation. But I was thinking, when we were talking about, we were setting this up, we didn't even know this was going to be an issue. Like, and we were talking about the economic, how to support small businesses, but now we have this whole other dynamic on top of it. And I think that would make your role and your how you're reacting to it very different, and I think that's it's important to highlight all of the challenges that you're facing.
Sure.
Yeah,
I think one thing that so often we don't put enough credence on is the fact that when things like this happen, we as a society need to allow ourselves to grieve and really like work through all of those stages of grief. And again, I think that the places, our public spaces and our communities are the place to do that, right? Because it needs to be done collectively with one another. It's not a process that you do in front of a computer at home. It's when you come together and congregate. And unfortunately, with the current health crisis, it's making it much more difficult. But I think that when communities realize that we can't just pick up the pieces and then pretend as though it didn't happen. We actually need to step back and really evaluate it, and then look at how we can do things differently. Because again, like as I think we're all thinking about this. It's like, well, what is different than 6 months ago, or what's different than a year ago, or what's different from the LA riots during the Rodney King
in the early 90s
event. What's different from 1968, and that's been brought up over the last 48 hours. And I would hope that what's different is that we're learning something. We're learning something as a society, and that. Yeah, I mean, it's just, I think, again, another reason why the work we do in communities, whether it's in downtowns or in neighborhoods, is still very relevant. It's not, the need is not going away.
Right. So are you, I was just thinking, like, do you have strategies for helping the downtowns with like some of the civil unrest, or are you just kind of keeping the same plan that you had in place? Have you changed what you're doing with that, or?
It's evolving.
Okay.
And it is something that, as a nonprofit organization, staff can have one idea, but we really need this to be, a board decision. Right. And, we do have members of our board from a variety of walks of life. Mm-hmm. So as much as we want to take action immediately, we also want to make sure that it's not a reaction, right, and that it is thoughtful. And, more than anything, the role that we can play as a statewide nonprofit in guiding our local organizations is important. That there's things that we can help them with, but there's also a place and a position for us as well. And so, we may not be leading the more aggressive, I shouldn't say aggressive, but more of the protests, but right, we are looking at ways that we can help facilitate the dialogue.
Right. And I think, sorry, go ahead.
No, a good example, I think it's important to know that each of our communities is experiencing things on a wide spectrum, right? So some places are having protests where others may not be experiencing it at all. So I see our role as if a community should reach out to us and say, how do we address that? Well, maybe it's putting together a rapid response plan for them, where they have all the different entities from that community come together and make sure they know who the point person is for making a statement. Or so that's where I see my level of involvement to some degree, not necessarily taking a stance one way or the other. I think we've tried
Right.
to be cognizant of making sure we're looking at all perspectives and not necessarily making a judgment.
Yeah, and I guess that was more more what I was thinking about was like, are you helping to like coordinate the business owner so that they can, because they've already, had to deal with all of the COVID stuff, and now this, especially in the areas that are having the protests. I just was curious, like if there was something that you have. But I guess it makes sense to keep that at the local level and let each organization, or not each organization, but each community to kind of fill that out themselves, because every community would be different. Yeah.
Sure. So then let's say in response to COVID, we did a series of webinars looking at volunteer development or grant programs like emergency grant assistance, or putting together a revolving loan fund, looking at virtual First Fridays, to make sure that they did have programs in place, and we do them and they're widely available. So, people can participate if it's applicable to them, and then hopefully take some of those pieces back to their community and use them as needed.
Yeah, I thought, and I guess that kind of gets us into how listeners can support local businesses. I did think that the meme, I guess that's what I call them. One of the interns told me that it's not a meme because it's not funny. I don't know what else to call it.
I don't know the difference.
I'm not 20, so I don't know these things. But the meme that I guess the National Main Street Association put out for how to support local businesses maybe late March. I thought that was great. Are there other things, or do you want to talk about some of those ways that our listeners can help support local businesses?
Sure. I think the National Main Street Center did do a great job as far as really educating consumers. And, many of our businesses, many of our business districts, I think were able to respond pretty quickly. And like we talked about earlier, I mean, there are, varying levels of sophistication maybe with some of the business owners, and also willingness. So in a time like this, I think we're not just talking about recovery, but we're also talking about resilience and resiliency. And so what are the things that, if they didn't do it early on, that they could be doing now in case we do, or when we do have another round of outbreaks? And so, really having a strong online presence, and I think that's where for many consumers, that's their connection, right? They can't, in many cases, and particularly, with us in the Southeast, you can't yet go into many businesses, but you can support them online. And I think more than anything too, we need to speak with our dollars. We need to think about not just supporting local businesses as consumers, but also as other businesses. Are we as a business supporting our fellow business, the business to business activity? And then from a local government perspective, are we making our communities business friendly and looking at ways to be able to support, whether it's in, from a permitting perspective, a zoning perspective, parking minimums, and those sorts of things, to really encourage more locally owned, smaller, independent businesses in our downtowns.
Right.
So, and I think the consumer perspective crosses over into all of that as well.
Yeah.
But I mean, thinking downtown first, buying downtown first. Really just educating ourselves on the importance too that a local dollar has in the from an impact perspective in your local community, and really providing support for those local wages. I think something else too that I just wanted to touch on that kind of connects what we were talking about earlier. We've for a long time talked about disaster planning. And it's one thing to think about, after a flood, or after your business or your downtown has had a fire, because you're responding to that. It's another to do it proactively. And so often we don't take the time to do that. And a number of years ago, we had a conference, and it was all about disaster planning and looking at every single aspect of it, from the, building to business to, online, electronic, cybersecurity, like the whole gamut. And I don't think, it was fine. People listened, they took things in, maybe they applied one or two things, but no one that I know of really took the time and invested the effort in creating a comprehensive disaster strategy and plan. So, when we talk about this resiliency perspective, my hope would be that that's something that we're able to do now, that we're able to look at ways that we can, take action now so that we are better prepared for whatever the next thing is, whether it's another COVID outbreak, whether like in downtown Erie, we had a number of businesses that were damaged by some rioting and things during the protests, whether it's a fire, whether it's flooding, whatever it might be. But I think so often we don't think about it. We forget. Yeah. We're really maybe actively engaged for a while, and then other things come up and it no longer becomes priority. So my hope would be that something along that realm continues to become priority.
Yeah. And I think that's important, because I think that, when you're doing your day-to-day business and you're just doing your work, you don't think about, what will happen. You're just trying to get today done. And I think that that's really, it's human nature, but it's important to have those plans in place, and especially as a business owner. And my husband and I, thankfully, he had a ton of fabrication that he was working on, so he just kept working in the shop by himself. So we really haven't been impacted, but looking around at the other businesses and saying, I don't know what I would do, because some of them closed immediately and then tried to reopen, but nobody assumed they were open. Some of them stayed open. And I said, I don't know what I would have done, facing those choices. So that's a good reminder for me too. But it's you don't know what to do in that situation, because we haven't, at least I haven't lived through this before. Anything like this. So yeah.
Well, and you have the sense that it'll never happen to me.
Right.
You know what I mean?
Yeah.
We kind of, as a society, have that outlook, I think, sometimes. Yeah. And this hopefully will put things into perspective.
Yeah.
Out of necessity, I think it has. So
yeah, I agree. From your perspective, and you see across the entire state, what challenges and trends do you see in preservation? I know I've seen a lot of articles, mostly from realtors, who are saying, oh, this is going to force everybody out of the big cities. Everybody's going to move into the suburbs, because then they can, be spread out and they won't be on top of each other anymore. Are you seeing those trends? I think it's still too early to see that, but I think they're just trying to sell their houses in the suburbs. But do you, what challenges or trends are you seeing?
I think that's it's a good point that has come up in multiple discussions. So I think there is some truth to that, where some people may want to move out, but like you said, it's too early to tell quite yet. I do think there's some concern with the amount of commercial space that may be vacated due to people working from home and businesses reassessing their overhead and things like that. So that is something that we need to look at. But I think we also have looked at it as an opportunity from a preservation standpoint, and how do we better use those spaces, and making sure that our communities and our municipalities are taking this time right now to get ahead of it and be proactive. So we did a webinar with the Pennsylvania Historical and Museum Commission last week about how to use preservation as an economic tool moving forward in response to COVID. So taking the time to, and practice, essentially, that's my dog scratching at the door. But looking at reviewing your ordinances and considering other ordinances that may need to be put in place to really be responsive to what's going to happen most likely. So I think the majority of us see preservation as an economic development tool.
Right.
but how do we really make sure that the groups that need to be involved with our communities understand that and really are all coming together to make sure that that's a priority and understand how to utilize it as a tool, not just saying, yes, we know this is important, and then taking a back seat. So getting ahead of it and making sure that the ordinances or the zoning or all those different aspects of preservation are put in place so that when people have the opportunity to invest or they're able to do so easily.
Mm-hmm. Yes. Yeah. What were you going to say?
I was just going to say, I think my fear is, though, that for some communities, this will just be like the straw, right? The last straw, that they've been looking for an excuse to not do something or to demolish a building, and that they could say, well, economically, it's not viable. But I think that, any argument can be made depending on the will. And so I think that, again, going back to reiterate what Mary said, I mean, it is important for the community to know where they stand. What is their ethic? Do they have a preservation ethic?
Right.
And what does that look like? Is it reflective in not just the ordinances or the zoning or having a harbor, an historic district overlay, but are they providing education to homeowners, to other property owners? Are they providing access to different kinds of incentive funding? Are they providing, information regarding consultants and professionals who can really, are conservationists and preservationists, and really, again, going back to the ethic, value the historical piece that really, again, that's what makes our communities authentic and real. And so it really does, it's a values driven, not just economic driven conversation as well.
Yeah, absolutely. I think that's a piece that it's that intrinsic value, I think, too, like that sense of memory and heritage, and when people think of preservation, that's not always, there are many different definitions of preservation or interpretations, and that's something internally our staff has conversations on how we interpret different terms. So I think that's something that we all agree on, is that there's a sense of community in preservation, and making sure that if that were to be taken away, then how would that affect your community, and how would that change your memory and your heritage of that particular place?
Right.
Starts to be one of those philosophical and conceptual conversations, but I think it's really important because sometimes people don't recognize that until it's too late, and then you can't get that back.
Right. And I've had that conversation recently about, once you remove all the historic fabric from a building, it's just an old building. It's no longer like, it's just a shell there. And not that you can't bring that back, but that's a lot more expensive than just maintaining it.
Sure.
And and I think that's the same thing. Like, after you take what is special in a downtown, and I look at like the pictures of what Lancaster Square looked like before the urban development in the late 60s, and those buildings, and they just demolished them for concrete. Like, I don't know why anybody thought that was progress, but they did at the time. And so I think so I think that there needs to be, like, that needs to be your starting point and your value, and then you can move forward from there, making choices that honor that value.
Right.
Definitely. So
hopefully from the past as well.
Yeah.
Right.
So is there anything, I know we've kind of jumped around and talked about a lot of different things. Is there anything that you wanted to cover that we didn't touch on, or that you wanted to share that you can think of?
Yeah, I mean, I think for anyone who is like in this realm professionally and as volunteers as well, there's lots of ways that you can get involved. Okay. So we are a membership-based organization. So for anyone who's interested, you can feel free to check out our website. We do have a number of free resources as well. As Mary mentioned earlier, we do have an extensive library of elements that we've developed out of the last few months during the COVID crisis. We've got webinars and our listening sessions that are all archived and publicly available on our website. But for those individuals or communities that want to get a little bit more involved and really work through a revitalization effort in their community, or just take the effort that is currently happening to the next level, I just encourage you to look at our website and the different member benefits that we offer, plus the fact that you're then becoming part of a network. Yeah. Realizing that you don't have to do it alone, that whatever you're dealing with right now, another community has come before you. So, we learn from each other, and I think that that's a true value to being part of our organization. And just know that you can be involved at lots of different degrees, and it can be a local government that's working on the revitalization effort. It can be the revitalization organization. It can be a preservation organization. It can be a countywide effort as well. And so, there's lots of different partners that can be part of the effort in a community. And it's not just a one size fits all, right. One size, but it is very diverse.
Well, and it helps if you get everybody involved, because then you're making sure that everybody's voices are heard as you're moving forward. So you're more likely to get buy-in, hopefully.
That's a critical component of our work. Yes.
Yes. So I'm assuming the website, but is that the best way for people to contact you and find out more is to go to the website?
Yeah,
we're active on. Go ahead. No, I was going to say we're active on LinkedIn and Facebook as well. So we have Maria Worley handles all of that. So people can look for us there. It's Pennsylvania Downtown Center. And she's great at responding, and she tries to keep all of the updates available on all of the social media platforms.
Okay, very good. And I will make sure those and your website are listed also on our site where the podcast is put up. And then we talked a little bit before we got started about the offers, and you said that you have some webinars, and I think you mentioned those on the website, but then you also have another series coming up. Is that correct?
Yeah, we're going to be working with Donovan Ripkema and Place Economics. Normally we have our annual conference in June, and in light of us having to postpone this year's conference until next year, we are going to be offering some webinars that we're hoping to also be able to offer continuing education credits for as well. So this is going to be around preservation, and as it relates to the vacancy, the kind of value of a vacancy in your downtown, and looking at ways that we can do some of this work ourselves, and really understand the impact and the opportunity that preservation brings to a community. So we're going to be formulating all of that information, and then we will be promoting that in another week or so. So I would say look for that. And also, if you need to reach out to us, you can connect to us on our website. To each of the staff members, you can access our email directly there. And I think another way that listeners can become involved is anytime there's an opportunity for advocacy and reaching out to your local legislators. Our voice needs to be heard. Our voice needs to be loud and strong. And given that we do have a historic preservation tax credit in Pennsylvania, we need more support with that. We need more support from Main Street. It's not just about the programs, but it's really about all of us really speaking up and being able to have our voice be heard and support what matters to us in our communities.
Yes. Okay. Well, thank you very much. I hope you have a great rest of your day.
Thank you.
Great.
Thanks for having us.
Take care.
Thanks for listening to the Practical Preservation Podcast. The resources discussed during this episode are on our website at practicalpreservationservices.com/podcast. If you received value from this episode and know someone else that will get value from it as well, please share it with them. Join us next week for another episode of the Practical Preservation Podcast. For more information on restoring your historic home, visit practicalpreservationservices.com.